This is an overview of Carry-Over Lottery Allocation, a draft mechanism for the NBA draft. It is designed to be both practical and incentive compatible. We'll do an introduction as well as going over several different variants of the mechanism. We'll start by talking about what we want to see in a draft mechanism. Then we'll do an overview of the framework of COLA, Carry-Over Lottery Allocation. We'll talk about different design choices that you could make within that framework, and then talk about 5 specific flavors or variants of COLA depending on what design choices you might make. In evaluating a draft mechanism, there are several desirable properties. 2 of them are preferencing for weaker teams, meaning that whatever the weaker teams are, we want them to have an advantage in the draft. Let them go first, let them have the highest probability of going first, something like that. But we also don't want to induce tanking or teams losing on purpose, because if you give advantage to the teams with the worst record, that's an incentive for teams to have the worst record and lose on purpose. So why can't we just give up helping the weaker teams? The issue is that good free agents tend to go to just a few select markets or to teams that are already contenders. So teams that are not doing well, they don't have much hope to get better other than through the draft. So the draft is the best way for them to improve. And so because the owners are the people who will be approving any change to the NBA draft, it is mandatory that we do help the weaker teams. What do we mean by the worst team or the weakest team? Traditionally, that just refers to the team that has the worst record at the end of the season. Unfortunately, if we only look at the end of season record, there's no way to give an advantage to that worst team without inducing tanking. That's a result from Monroe and Boncio from 2020. So our solution is to not look at the end of season record. Instead, we're going to look at previous seasons. But also not looking at regular season record, we're going to be considering playoff results. There are a couple of other things we'd also like to see from a draft mechanism. We would like to give advantages to the unlucky teams. This is not something the current NBA draft does, although there are talks of doing that by, for example, not allowing a team to win the lottery 2 years in a row. If you have a team winning the #1 draft pick back-to-back, when another team hasn't won a top 4 pick for 10 years, that doesn't seem quite fair. So if we can do something to mitigate that, that would be great. Perhaps even more importantly, it needs to be something that's practical. It has to be something we can implement in real life, and it also has to be something that is not too radical, something that can actually earn the approval of 23 owners who are ultimately going to have to approve it. In summary, we don't want to incentivize teams to lose games. We want to help the weak and unlucky teams, and we want to do so in a practical way. Also, I'm adding playoff track record to the list because playoff track record is a better measure of what the bad teams are than a regular season record. One bad season doesn't mean it's a really bad team. Failing to make the playoffs repeatedly, that means it's a bad team. Now let's introduce the Carry-Over Lottery Allocation COLA framework. More losses don't improve your lottery odds. Lottery tickets carry over to the next year, and stockpiles of tickets are reduced when a team either wins in the lottery or wins in the playoffs. In this way, it favors the weak and unlucky teams because they don't win in the lottery, they don't win in the playoffs, their stockpiles are untouched, and so they have the larger stockpiles over time. Within this framework, many variants are possible. We're going to start by talking about what kind of design decisions are going to be made in order to determine what the variant is. One quick definition before we get started. Lottery index is a number that all teams have. It indicates how many lottery tickets that team will receive if they're in the lottery. If they're not in the lottery, they don't get any tickets, but they still have that number. If you are in the lottery, you're going to get that number of tickets, and it will only be reduced if you win the lottery or if you win in the playoffs. Teams that lose in the lottery and teams that lose in the playoffs, they are not going to have their lottery index reduced. Within the COLA framework, there's a lot of freedom to create a variant tailored to the specific needs of the league. These are some of the design choices that you have to make when you're deciding how to implement COLA. So some of these will not require any additional discussion, but some will, and we'll talk about them later. Just a quick rundown. Who's in the lottery? Is it all of the non-playoff teams, or is it somebody else as well? What increment do teams get? Each year, Some teams will be getting additional lottery tickets, adding to their lottery index, that is. The main rule is that losses can't help. That's to make it incentive compatible. But beyond that, there's a lot of freedom in how you want to design it. Reduction schedules for winning the lottery and winning the playoffs. How much do we reduce the lottery index based on wins in the lottery or the playoffs? How many draft picks do we raffle off? Just the 4 that the NBA does now, or do we do more? Maybe even less. You don't actually have to raffle off any of them. How do we order the draft picks that are not raffled off? Are they going to be ordered by worst standings, as we do now, or ordered some other way, ordered by draft index? How do we handle traded draft picks? Are we going to allow draft protections? Are we going to allow traded draft picks to be eligible for the lottery? So those are decisions that we have to make. Some other design choices. When there is a strong draft class, more teams will be incentivized to be in the lottery. And it may be the case that there are more teams that want to be in the lottery than there are slots in the lottery. In this case, it would be necessary to move the line up and allow more teams into the lottery in order to maintain incentive compatibility. So do we want to allow that? Or are we just going to have a static line that never moves? If we are going to allow the line to move, how do we decide to do that? Do we allow a team to opt out of a weak draft class? This is something that you may want to include, because if a team wins the draft lottery and loses their lottery index, and they only get a mediocre player because it was not a strong draft class, they could view that as a loss. In order to avoid having teams view a draft win as a loss, you may want to allow them to opt out of the draft class, or maybe not. Maybe allow it for a cost. Do we want to allow back-to-back lottery winners? Do we want to allow playoff winners to win the lottery the very next year? These are two suggestions that the NBA has floated in recent days. I just mentioned them because they're completely compatible with COLA. You could add those in as additional rules if you wanted to. I want to spend some time talking about the possibility of needing to move the line from between the playoff teams and the lottery teams to move it up to possibly allow some playoff teams into the lottery. Consider a playoff team that's a marginal playoff team. They're going to be an 8 seed. They don't think they have much of a chance, 2% chance at winning the championship. But there's a great player in the draft. And they're thinking, if we get that player, we have a 10% chance roughly of getting that player because we have a large lottery index. They might feel like they're better off in the draft than they are in the playoffs. And if that's the case, they then have an incentive to tank out of the playoffs. This is something that could possibly happen, and we would like to be able to detect that and do something about it to maintain incentive compatibility. And so we need to detect when that happens, raise the line to say, all right, all first round playoff losers, you can be in the lottery after all. Or maybe even all second round playoff losers can be in the lottery as well. In an extreme situation, I can't really imagine this, you raise the line all the way to the top, and even the NBA champion is allowed to be in the lottery. So that's the idea. You move the line as far as you have to in order to maintain incentive compatibility. We want to be able to handle these priority inversions. What should be the primary goal, making the playoffs, is seen as less desirable than the draft, which should be the secondary goal. There are a few ways to handle this. First, some simple solutions. The league office could unilaterally decide we're going to raise the line, allow more teams into the lottery. Or we could have a blue ribbon commission do that. Another option, we could permanently set the line high. And every year we're always going to allow everybody who loses in the first round into the lottery. Could do that. Another option is we just allow teams to opt out. All of these are simple solutions. They do have their own cons. We're also going to consider a more complicated solution. Another option is to use a survey of experts, media members, analysts, in order to determine if the line must be moved. We can use a truth elicitation mechanism that is going to incentivize survey takers to give an honest opinion instead of just voting the common wisdom. Because it is important for these media members, these analysts, to actually put thought into what it is that they're looking at and decide, does there exist a team that has an incentive to tank even during the playoffs, or to tank to miss the playoffs? So this is going to have better accuracy and should be more accepted due to the wisdom of crowds. So wisdom of crowds is a real thing as long as the crowd is well informed and as long as the crowd is taking the time to actually answer the question. So it should have better accuracy, and it should also get better legitimacy if there are a large number of people participating. On the other hand, it is more complex. There's also a cost of paying for the survey. That's part of the incentivizing the survey takers to participate. When we have to raise the line to allow more teams into the lottery, we do it in order to maintain incentive compatibility. We don't want to see teams tanking. That means that some of the better teams are now in the lottery, and that dilutes the advantage for the weaker teams. But there is something we can do to help the weaker teams, even in this scenario. We're giving the annual increment. We're giving everyone some kind of an increase to their lottery index. In the year when we move the line, we can just not do that. And in that year, teams are going to enter the lottery just with whatever they've carried forward from the previous year. And in that way, we'll help the weaker teams just a bit. Another design decision is, what do we do with traded draft picks? Suppose the Clippers trade a draft pick to the Sixers. That draft pick ends up being chosen as number 1. Whose lottery index is reduced? If we reduce the Clippers, that seems to violate the principle of preferencing for unlucky teams. The Clippers didn't win anything. Why should their lottery index be reduced? On the other hand, if we reduce only the Sixers index, then the Clippers, if they have a high lottery index, they could trade their picks over and over again, getting a high value for their draft picks and never having their lottery index reduced. This isn't fair to the rest of the league. It's an unfair advantage for the Clippers. You could reduce both teams' lottery indices, but then it gets confusing. There's constantly going to be questions about why do we have to do both, and this is the reason why. So a simple solution is just to say that if you trade a draft pick, the draft pick is not going to be entered in the lottery, just not allowed to win the lottery at all. Now, this is to avoid the advantage that the Clippers could get from repeatedly trading away their picks. So the picks that are already traded, if we transition to this system, they should just use option number 2. You reduce the Sixers lottery index. They're the ones who won the lottery, so you reduce theirs. The Clippers would not be able to take advantage of that loophole. So for traded draft picks, they should remain eligible for the lottery as you're coming into the system, just not allow it afterwards. What about pick protections? Should you have pick protections on traded draft picks? Protections 1 to 4, those are fine because you can't tank into that anyway. You just have to get lucky. But pick protections 1 through 14, that could incentivize tanking to miss the playoffs. So if we believe nobody's ever going to do that, then that should be okay. But we actually have seen that. That's what Dallas did. They tried to get out of the playoffs in order to keep their draft pick. So we have seen that in the past. I would recommend probably not allowing protections 1 through 14, just allowing 1 through 4, and that's it. Now that we have covered all of the various design decisions that need to be made, we're going to cover 5 different variants or flavors of COLA. Starting with Classic COLA, this is the version that is in the paper that was released a couple of weeks ago. McCarty COLA, named after one of my colleagues who helped to come up with this idea that we can use to give a strong incentive for teams to win even after they've been eliminated. Strong COLA and Lucky COLA are just proofs of concept showing how much COLA could help a weak team and how much COLA could help a unlucky team, respectively. And then finally, Diet COLA, which is not designed to actually be implemented. It was designed to be very simple to make a proof simpler. Let's start with Classic COLA. Classic COLA, this is where we're going to have every non-playoff team get a plus 1,000 lottery tickets. when a team wins the first draft pick, they lose all of their lottery tickets. Their lottery index goes to 0. Second goes down 75%. Third goes down 50%. Fourth goes down 25%. Similarly, steps 100, 75, 50, 25, depending on how many playoff series a team wins. So the champion loses lottery index down to 0, whereas a team that wins just one playoff series, their lottery index is reduced by 25%. The draft raffles off 4 picks, just like the current NBA draft. Picks 5 and up are in reverse order of this year's standings, just like the current NBA draft. Traded picks, we only allow 1 through 4 protection. Otherwise, they can't win the lottery. So if you trade a pick and it's not protected, it's not going to be in the lottery at all. And then the opt-out. So if you want to be in the lottery, great. If you don't, it's going to cost 2,000 tickets to abstain from the lottery. And that's something you would only want to do if you've got a huge stockpile and it's a weak draft class and you're thinking, I've got 10,000, I don't want to possibly lose 10,000 tickets on this particular draft class. In terms of moving the line, in this version we did recommend using the robust Bayesian truth theorem and the media analyst survey to determine when to move the line so that we can accurately maintain incentive compatibility. McCarty COLA might be my favorite right now. For McCarty COLA, what we're going to do is define drought length as the number of seasons that a team has gone without winning a single playoff series and also not making a #1 draft pick. And now the increment schedule is going to be different for each team. We're going to look at how many wins they have this season and multiply that by their drought length. This gives teams a strong incentive to win because every single win gets them more lottery tickets. However, notice that it's multiplied by drought length, which means that the bad teams are getting more lottery tickets. So they are being favored even though teams are incentivized to win. And consider at the extreme, I took these numbers by looking at the past 7 years. The lowest win total was 14 wins, and the highest win total that wasn't in the playoffs was 46 wins. With McCarty COLA, if the playoffs and the lottery were totally spread out evenly, on average, teams would have a drought length of 3 before it gets reset. So suppose a team has an average length 3 drought, and another team has had bad luck and they haven't been in the playoffs and it's been 10 years. Even with the 14 times 10 gives you 140, 46 times 3 gives you 126. So a team that really has been suffering, even if they can't win anything, they're still getting a bigger increment than the team who's only been out of the playoffs for 3 years. Draft picks 5+, base those on the high lottery index. This takes away another possible incentive to tank. Now note that if we go by standings, that's a slight incentive to tank potentially because you tank, okay, we're going to go from 14th down to 5th. That is an improvement. Now it's not a big deal if teams view those picks as roughly equivalent, but if they don't, then that could be an incentive to tank. We can take that away, and that's what we do here in McCarty COLA by just going by high lottery index. In Classic COLA, I had suggested just sticking with the status quo just to make it easier to make the transition. We're making as few changes as possible there with Classic COLA. We will allow traded picks to win the lottery. I think it's fine personally. The only reason not to do that is because it's more complex. Reduce the lottery index for both teams. It makes traded picks a little bit harder to nail down because there are a number of different ways that you could trade a pick. But other than that, it's the same as Classic COLA. Strong COLA is just a demonstration of how much we can possibly do for weak teams. So the increment is only going to go to the lottery teams, but it's going to be based on the number of years without making the playoffs. So you get 0 the first year, you get 1,000 tickets your second year, then 2,000, 4,000, 8,000. So we're going up. The longer you miss the playoffs, you're getting exponentially more tickets each year. Given that, it shouldn't take too long until you make the playoffs. You get the reduction for winning the lottery, there's none. So you just keep accruing until you make the playoffs. And not just making the playoffs, this is going to help the weak teams to actually win in the playoffs. As soon as you win a playoff series, we're going to go all the way down to 0. But if you haven't won in the playoffs, you're going to keep your lottery index. It's just going to keep growing. Otherwise, it's the same as classic COLA. In this one, it is more important that we do move the line correctly, because now, if you've got 8,000, you may have a strong incentive to say, I don't want to win this playoff series quite yet. So we do need to get it right in terms of moving the line potentially if there is an incentive, and reading what are the teams thinking. Do they actually value winning in the playoffs? You'd hope so. That's what the game's all about. But if not, it is important to read the room and determine whether or not that tanking is going to occur and react accordingly. Lucky COLA is the same idea, just reversed. So you'll notice with strong COLA, in terms of winning the lottery, there's no penalty. With Lucky COLA, winning the playoffs, there's no penalty. We're just making sure everybody takes their own turn. You get lucky, somebody else is going to get lucky and win the next year. So the increment only goes to the lottery teams, but it's based on how many consecutive lotteries you've been in without winning. So if you're not in the lottery, it doesn't count. But if you're in the lottery, you don't win, it's going to count, and it just goes up from there. So your first lottery increments to 0, then 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, 8,000, until eventually you win. We're going to raffle off 6 picks, not just 4, and we're going to have a total ban on winning back-to-back. So any team that won any of the 6 picks the previous year, they're not in this year. Now, assuming that we don't have too much turnover, we may have 6 winners last year, 6 winners this year. That's 12 different winners. And considering that a lot of times teams are out of the playoffs for multiple years in a row, we're giving a higher lottery pick to a large number of teams very quickly. The reductions for lottery wins, 100%, 80%, and so on, but no reduction for playoff wins. We're just focusing here on punishing the lucky so that somebody else can be lucky the next time. Now, strong COLA and lucky COLA are not versions I'd recommend for implementation. They're just demonstrations for how much leeway we have to tune this in one direction or the other. Because I do imagine with 30 owners deciding what it should look like, there's going to have to be some place to make some compromises, and this is showing where you can make those compromises in terms of how you might tune the increment, how you might tune the reductions to get the desired effect. But I do want to point out that the debate can now be about how much do we help lucky teams versus how much do we help weak teams. We don't have to debate about tanking. Tanking can pretty much be taken off the table. And Diet COLA, this is the proof of that. Diet COLA is a version that's highly simplified for a formal proof that's not in this video, but I will state the result here shortly. The way Diet COLA works is round 1 playoff losers, they're also going to be in the lottery. We're going to raffle off 22 draft picks for all 22 teams that are in the lottery. So everything's raffled off. Increment is just 1. There's no reduction for lottery wins. But any playoff series win will take you all the way back to 0. Can't trade draft picks, just to make it simple. It was for the proof. It's not recommended for implementation, but it is something that did provide a formal proof for an important result. I will link to the formal proof, but here we're just going to state the result, starting with our assumptions. First of all teams prefer to win a playoff series over being in the lottery. Second, they prefer to be in the lottery and get a higher pick versus winning any single game. Next, they prefer to win a game instead of lose a game, all else being equal. Next, the games are independent. That means that if you rest players now, it's not going to help you win later. The games are independent. That particular scenario is out of scope. And then finally, the value of winning a single game is greater than the expected gain from manipulating the pool of teams in the lottery. You'll have to see the proof for why that matters, but it's going to look at what we believe is a rare situation and also not likely to be very valuable. So we do believe it's a reasonable assumption to just say that this scenario is not going to happen. And that leads us to our formal result. Under reasonable assumptions, the ones we just stated, a simple version of the Carry-Over Lottery Allocation draft mechanism, namely Diet COLA, is incentive compatible, and under Diet COLA, the team with the longest active streak of seasons without a playoff series win has the highest probability of receiving the #1 draft pick. Now, we've covered a lot of different details. One thing we didn't talk about is what do we do to get started? How do we go from the current NBA draft into a version of COLA? And we can do that by just picking a year in the recent past, or going back as far as you need to, and walking history forward to see what would the index be for each team now. And as an example, if we were doing classic COLA, we could start in 1999, and if we came forward from 1999, every team would experience at least a 75% reduction because they've all had either a #1 or #2 pick, or they've been in the NBA Finals. So in that sense, we're capturing all of the relevant recent history by starting from 1999. And if we do that, what would the results be? Well, the highlights are that the Kings and the Bulls have the highest lottery indices. Between the two of them, there's been only one playoff series win and one top 3 draft pick since 2009. So it makes sense, based on that information, that they should have the highest lottery indices. And looking back at the 2025 lottery, if we were using classic COLA as the rule for the lottery, the two teams that would have had the greatest reduction in their probabilities would have been the Wizards and the Sixers. The Sixers had just had 7 consecutive playoff appearances. The Wizards had just won the #2 pick the prior year, and so they would have seen some pretty significant reductions in their probabilities of winning the lottery last year. I hope this has been helpful. We've talked about carryover lottery allocation. Again, a quick summary. More losses don't help. Once a team is in the lottery, there's no other advantage to be gained. Carryover and reductions for lottery and playoff success, those two work together so that teams that don't have lottery or playoff success are going to get advantages over time. So we're helping the worst teams, we're helping the unluckiest teams without inducing tanking. So we're meeting these five criteria: practicality, anti-tanking, helping both the weak and unlucky teams, and also using the playoff track record, which again, I list that as one of the criteria because on its own, even if we could manage to stop tanking by looking at the end of season record, the worst teams are not the teams with the worst individual regular season record. The worst teams are the teams that keep missing the playoffs over and over again, and they're the ones that need the help. We've looked at 5 different variants, 2 of which are recommended for implementation. Classic COLA, designed to be a smooth transition from the current NBA system. McCarty COLA is actually what I would prefer. It gives better incentives, but it is a bit more complex. Strong COLA and lucky COLA, again, giving you an illustration of how you can tune the parameters within the framework to get the desired result. And then finally, Diet COLA that we had used for proving the formal result, and that video will be linked below. Thanks.